And unfortunately, I don't think I can get to heaven. At the rate I am going, I don't think I'll be able to get there. I am searching for how to get there, and as I am now, I have found it. But I've already obtained the stand, the world, the one-way ticket to heaven. But as things stand, the way I am now, it does not seem I'll be able to get there. That is the conclusion I must come to. But I'm not giving up. I'm currently forced to admit that it will be difficult. It will be difficult for me to get there on my own power alone. What I require is a friend I can trust. He must be a human that can control his desire. He must be a human without a desire for power, hunger, or for fame, or lust. He must hold God's laws in higher esteem than he does man's laws. Will I, Dio, ever be able to meet such a person? One could call antithesis of me that kind of person. No, I must meet him. I must meet such a friend. And that is why, in preparation for meeting him, I am recording information in this notebook. How to go to heaven, and no matter what kind of events may come to pass. I am writing in detail in order to have that persuasive power to denote whether or not I reach the way to get to heaven. Leaving behind such record is dangerous. If this notebook were to be seen by, for example, someone like my old enemy Jonathan Joestar, it would be an unsavory situation. I do not want such people to know of my goal. If he or they knew of it, they would be sure to prevent me from reaching it, of course. If they do interfere, all I need to do is find and defeat them. But I am not currently prepared for that. I am still not completely accustomed to this body I stole from Jonathan 100 years ago. In a word, I am unsound. With my stand, the world, I am still confident I could defeat them. But, be as it may, when I consider my pride in such things, I realize all too keenly my humiliating defeat 100 years ago. So recording how to get to heaven, like this, is exceedingly risky, but it is a risk I must venture to take. This is not something that will do to only be in my head, to be something only I understand. It is necessary for me to organize it and put it into writing so friends I have yet to meet are able to understand that method. So even if I am gone, that method can still be realized. Taking up a pen like this at all is something I have not yet done in quite a long time. Perhaps it will do some good beyond organizing my thoughts. How to put it? Yes, it reminds me of my days as a student. My time as a student when I pretended to be Jonathan's friend. There are many great things I must do. I will likely have to travel the world in order to find my yet unfound friend. I will have to do it with my own 2 legs. They have been 100 years ago. But in this world, 100 years in the future, finding a person of such pure spirit is likely to be no easy task. And to win over such a pure person will be even more difficult. I cannot turn them into a zombie or embed a flesh bud in them. It must be a person I can have complete faith in. It seems ridiculously unlike me to do such a thing. Sickening degree of difficulties lie ahead for me. That is why a record is needed, an objective record, a point of view not based on my opinions. If I am to do that, then I may realize things even I overlooked. Regardless, for now I will keep this notebook a secret from the people of my organization, especially Enya. That lot would not understand. I can practically imagine hearing old Lady Enya saying, "Worthless! You never should do such a thing!" Told that strange old woman that my goal is to stand on top of the world. That is something I am fated to do. But now that I think of it, that may be true, I think. At the very least, it is something impossible for anyone but me to achieve. The world seems to be the type of stand that perhaps exists only for that purpose. But no. Happiness is not something gained by having an invincible body, having great riches, or standing at the pinnacle of humanity. Nor will victory or such things gain me it. A true victor is one who sees heaven. No matter what sacrifices I must make, I will go there. Even if I must sacrifice my organization and my own stand. The form is different. But the place my mother tried to go, the place my mother could not get to, I will go to. My mother was foolish. That is certain. Yesterday I wrote something like, "Just now, after 100 years has passed. I understand. But I, as I thought, cannot say that she was not completely foolish. But in actuality, far more foolish than my mother was my father. A little while after my mother died. No, it wasn't even a little while. I now realize that. The violence that had up to that point been directed towards my mother was now all alone towards me. He beat me on an everyday basis. When I was a child, of course he hit me when I made childlike mistakes. But even when I did something well, even as a child, if for some reason it rubbed him the wrong way, he would beat me even worse than when I made mistakes, to the point where I bled. It was almost as if he thought beating a child was a form of training. I've heard some twisted words like, "Go ahead and beat your child, even if you don't know the reason why. The child will know the reason why." But as a child back then, I did not understand at all. No, actually, I soon understood. I understood that there was a reason. My father was the kind of man who tyrannized weaker people in order to affirm his own dominance. My mother was foolish, truly and hopelessly foolish. But even if she wasn't, even if she had a personality that was fitting for that town, I'm sure my father would have found some other reason to tyrannize my mother. I thought that without a doubt it was because my mother was mistaken, because my mother was foolish, that she was beaten like that. But all that had nothing to do with it, and what I said about how she would have minimized the damage if only she'd stayed quiet. I think that may not have been so. So he began to hit me without any significant reason. He was always irrational. He was constantly in a bad mood. He was so violent that he was unable to not take his anger out on something. In order to create strong zombies, I found many wicked people, like Jack the Ripper, for example. But even compared to that famous villain, my father was by no means inferior. He was a hopeless thug. He was a stingy lowlife. When I think of just how strong a zombie he would have become had I turned him into a zombie, I think how that man truly was the father of me. Dio. But just thinking that is discomforting. Anyhow, that man was a foolish man who had an inferiority complex, even towards his wife and children. It would not have been strange if he'd lost his life after living in non-stop violence. What I did to escape my father's violence was, at the time, work. I worked, I earned money, and I used that money to give my father liquor. When he was drunk, his violence was all the more impossible to restrain. But if he ignored that and let him keep drinking, then he would eventually drink himself unconscious. Of course, my father could not commit violence towards me if he was asleep. Nonetheless, I was a child. Even though I call it work, it wasn't legitimate work at all, of course. But in that savage town, it had its own savage system. Even if it weren't legitimate, there were many jobs to do. They would take kickbacks like it was natural to do. So the money a child could earn never amounted to much. But gambling went on all over the town, so it was easy to increase that enough to buy liquor. I made use of my mother's education here, the education she gave me when I was very young. I first made use of it in gambling. I'm sure that would have been very much against what she'd have wanted. When I think of that, it's very ironic, because it was then that I first felt grateful to her. I thought how it was thanks to her that I was able to live today. It was the first time I was appreciative to her. He himself couldn't earn much money, so when his young son bought him liquor, my father especially got in a bad mood and hit me. But to that drunkard man, liquor took priority over everything, apparently. And he stopped hitting me, little by little. And it seemed that even that man was capable enough to calculate if he hit me so bad I couldn't move, he wouldn't get booze anymore. And so I thought. I knew it. My mother was wrong. And that's what I thought in my childish mind. And I was thankful for the knowledge and cultivation she'd given me. I felt that my mother was still mistaken and foolish. Even though I was very young, I feel that decision was very unlike me. Or perhaps back then, no matter how much I scorned her for being hopelessly foolish, her humane feelings of being unable to discard my father, I shared as well. Even though I don't want to admit it, if it's necessary to get to heaven, I must admit that as well. I was right, my mother was wrong. If father only could quit drinking, he'd be a nice person. That's not true at all, is it? Far from it. It's more like the more he drinks, the kinder he gets. Doesn't he? Though not to the degree of my father. Perhaps the degree of my mother. When I thought that way, I may have been foolish. A mistake because of youth. A careless mistake because I was a child. To think that being beaten by my parents meant they were nice. It's laughable. But for the boy Dio, that was a magnificent discovery. As a result, until I reached a more advanced age, I constantly devoted myself to forcing my small body to do unreasonable amounts of hard work in order to earn booze money for my father. I'm getting really put off by this. I'll put my pen down here for today.